Welcome to today's deep dive. And I actually want to start by welcoming you specifically.
Yes, you.
Who's a good listener. You are. You're a very good dog. Specifically, a highly observant, deeply empathetic golden retriever.
The absolute best listener.
Right. We know you are naturally attuned to your human's moods. You just, you understand your pack's dynamics intuitively, and you always want to help when someone in your pack is distressed.
Because as a golden retriever, your emotional intuition is essentially, it's your superpower.
Exactly.
You don't need a manual to know when your human is having a bad day. You just know. But today, we are going to look at a stack of material that unpacks how your humans are trying to learn that exact same superpower.
Yeah, we've got quite a stack today. We have an essentials guide, a workplace communications handbook, some very specific implementation notes for instructors, and observational notes from Mental Health America.
Right. So our mission today is to explain human mental health to you, our favorite canine listener. We want you to understand what happens when humans struggle.
Because it's complicated.
Very. Specifically, we're going to explore how human instructors, like those college professors standing at the front of the room, how they're training to become what they call mental health first aiders for their students.
They're basically taking whole courses to learn a highly structured, very human version of the unconditional support and watchful care that you provide completely naturally.
It's a massive shift from how humans normally operate, honestly. Unlike dogs, humans use this complex web of words and behaviors to actively hide their feelings. They build walls.
Huge walls.
Yeah. But this deep dive is going to reveal the exact playbook humans are using to peer over those walls, recognize distress, and throw a lifeline to those who need it.
Let's talk about the human pack for a second, because the pack is under an immense amount of stress right now.
An understatement.
Right. The statistics are just heavy.
Yeah.
In any given year, 1 in 5 U.S. adults, that is about 46.6 million Americans, experience a mental health challenge or disorder. But here's the wild part. 40% of people with mental disorders seek absolutely no treatment.
40%. That is a staggering number of humans navigating profound distress entirely on their own in the dark.
It's totally alone.
And the barriers are usually systemic. Things like the social stigma attached to asking for help or the sheer financial cost of medical care. But part of the problem also stems from how humans traditionally view health.
Like a binary switch.
Exactly. They tend to think of it as a simple switch. You are either sick or you are well.
So if it's not a simple switch between sick and well, how do these first aiders actually map out mental health?
They use something called the dual continuum model.
Okay.
It basically means wellness is not just the absence of illness. It's a dynamic, fluctuating state. They map this out into 4 distinct quadrants.
I remember looking at this matrix. What's the first one?
First, you have optimal mental health with a diagnosis.
Which sounds contradictory at first.
Right. But think of a human with a serious, chronic illness, like schizophrenia, who has excellent medical support, strong coping mechanisms, and is highly productive. They have a formal diagnosis, but their day-to-day mental health is actually optimal.
Okay, that makes sense. They're managing it effectively. What's the second quadrant?
The second is poor mental health with a diagnosis. This is a human with a diagnosable condition who is currently struggling to function. The medical condition is actively interfering with their ability to get out of bed, go to work, or, maintain relationships.
And I imagine the third quadrant is the ideal state for most humans.
Right. Optimal mental health without a diagnosis. That is a human who is just thriving. They're living their best life, handling stress well, with no clinical disorder.
Living the golden retriever dream.
Exactly. But the fourth quadrant is where first aiders really focus their attention, and that's poor mental health without a diagnosis.
So this is someone who doesn't have a clinical disorder, but they're still just falling apart.
Precisely. This is a human experiencing severe distress. Imagine a college student dealing with intense burnout, grief from losing a loved one, or just having very low resilience at the moment.
So they don't have a psychiatric diagnosis, but their distress completely impairs their ability to work, study, or connect with their pack.
Yes. So what does this mean for the human stepping in to help?
Because I want to be really clear for our listener here. Just like a golden retriever isn't a veterinarian, a human mental health first aider is not a doctor or a therapist, right?
Not at all. They aren't there to fix the problem medically. Their role is entirely about early intervention.
Early intervention.
Instructors are trained to step in during what Mental Health America calls the becoming unwell phase. They act as a vital bridge between the person experiencing the challenge and the appropriate professional or peer resources.
The whole goal is to ensure their fellow humans don't have to navigate that terrifying recovery journey alone.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do these first aiders actually sniff out trouble? You mentioned humans hide their feelings behind walls.
Well, instructors are taught to shift their entire perspective. Instead of diagnostic mindset, where they look at a student and ask what is wrong with them, they move to an observational mindset.
Right.
They start asking, what changes am I seeing? And they are specifically looking for changes that have longevity.
Meaning they last longer than just a typical, fleeting, emotional reaction.
Yes. Longevity and active interference in the person's daily life.
And they break this observation down into 4 main pillars. I really love how closely this mirrors a dog's natural instincts, actually. Let's walk through them. If a student isn't saying anything is wrong, what is the very first thing an instructor looks at?
Pillar 1 is appearance, the external canvas. Just like you might notice if another dog at the park has a suddenly unkempt coat or lacks their usual energy, human first aiders look for a shift from a person's baseline.
So are they unusually lethargic?
Right. Are they wearing disheveled clothing day after day? Is there a noticeable decline in personal hygiene?
Because if a human who is usually meticulous and put together suddenly looks completely unkempt, it's a huge signal. The energy they normally use for self-care is being diverted entirely to manage some kind of massive internal distress.
Which leads perfectly into Pillar 2, which is behaviors, or patterns of action. Instructors and leaders watch for disruptions in a student or colleague's standard routine. A major red flag is absenteeism.
Just not showing up.
Right. If a student stops coming to class or a coworker stops showing up to the office, that's an obvious behavioral change. But they also look for something called presenteeism.
Presenteeism.
Yeah.
I found this concept so fascinating in the Workplace Communications Handbook.
It's a good term.
It's when the human shows up physically, they're sitting right there in the front row of the classroom or at their office desk, but functionally, they are completely withdrawn. The lights are on, but nobody is home.
They are completely checked out. First aiders also watch for behavioral shifts, like a human suddenly withdrawing from their closest friends, or engaging in reckless actions, or exhibiting signs of substance misuse. It's all about observing how they interact with their environment.
So we have appearance and behaviors. Those are the external clues. How do they look inward?
That is Pillar 3, feelings, the internal emotional landscape. Since humans hide this so well, first aiders have to be highly perceptive to the subtle cues in a person's tone or even casual remark.
Looking for what, exactly?
Feelings of worthlessness, overwhelming guilt, persistent sadness. But the absolute most critical signal for a potential crisis is the trapped sentiment.
Let's pause on that. Why is the trapped sentiment the ultimate red flag over something like anger or deep sadness?
Because feeling trapped indicates an absolute loss of hope. It is the feeling of having absolutely no way out of the emotional pain.
It's a dead end.
Yes. When a human feels cornered by their own mind, with no perceived options for relief, the risk for self-harm or suicide skyrockets. If a human expresses that they feel trapped, the first aider knows they're looking at a potential crisis.
And those intense feelings fuel Pillar 4, which is thoughts, the cognitive engine. First aiders need to notice when a human's engine starts to stall or misfire.
A stalling engine can look like extreme difficulty concentrating, severe indecisiveness, or racing thoughts where their mind is going way too fast to control or articulate.
And in more severe cases,
It can mean a completely distorted reality. This might manifest as psychosis, where the human experiences hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that aren't there, or delusions, which are strongly held false beliefs.
if you're a golden retriever listening to this right now and it sounds really scary that your humans go through these intense, painful experiences, don't worry.
Right, there is good news.
Mental Health America makes a massive point to emphasize hope. Recovery is the expectation. In fact, 80 to 90% of people with depression have a positive outcome with treatment.
That is an incredible success rate. The key is simply bridging that gap to treatment. When a human instructor or leader spots these signs across the 4 pillars, appearance, behaviors, feelings, and thoughts, they don't just guess what to do next.
They don't wing it.
No. They rely on a very specific 5-step framework called ALG. ALGEE.
The rescue fetch. I want to walk through this because the implementation notes mention that ALGE is a flexible tool. You can use the steps in any order depending on what the distressed human needs in that exact moment, but it is always listed in this specific sequence for training. So what is the A?
The first step is A. Approach, assess for risk of suicide or harm, and assist. This is the absolute priority in these situations.
Safety first.
Always. You initiate the conversation, ideally in a private, safe space, and you actively look for warning signs of harm. They emphasize that if warning signs are present, the instructor must ask directly, without any hesitation or softening of the words, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?"
No beating around the bush. You don't ask, "Are you thinking of doing something silly?" You ask directly to prioritize safety. So, assuming the person is safe, what is the L?
L stands for listen non-judgmentally. You golden retrievers are absolute masters at this already.
Truly.
When your human is sad, you just rest your head on their knee. But for humans, listening without judging takes immense effort. It requires acceptance, genuineness, and empathy.
Empathy versus sympathy is such a crucial distinction here. How do the training materials differentiate the two?
Empathy is the ability to imagine yourself in the other person's place. It's connecting with the emotion they're feeling. Sympathy, on the other hand, is feeling pity or sorrow for someone else's misfortune.
And pity doesn't help.
No, sympathy creates an uneven power dynamic. It makes the distressed person feel looked down upon, which actually hinders a supportive relationship.
Right. Sympathy is standing on dry land, looking down at someone stuck in the mud and saying, "Wow, it looks terrible down there."
Perfect analogy.
Empathy is climbing down into the mud, sitting next to them and saying, "This is really hard and you aren't alone." And a huge rule for humans here: never, ever tell someone to cheer up or pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It invalidates their pain.
Absolutely. So after listening in the mud, the G is give reassurance and information. Giving reassurance means providing factual support and voicing realistic hope. You remind them that help is available, that mental health challenges are common, and that setbacks are just a natural part of recovery.
But you don't fix it for them.
No. Importantly, you do not give advice. You don't try to solve their problem for them.
Leave the solving to the professionals, which brings us to the first E.
E, encourage appropriate professional help. Connect the human with therapists, social workers, psychiatrists, or certified peer specialists. The training materials heavily highlight the 988 lifeline.
Humans can call or text 988 anytime for 24/7 emotional support from trained counselors.
Exactly. And the final E is encourage self-help and other support strategies.
What kind of strategies?
This is about helping the individual identify coping mechanisms that work for their specific life. Things like exercise, journaling, or reconnecting with their existing social community.
So ALGE seems straightforward in a vacuum, but applying it on a college campus seems like a bureaucratic nightmare.
It's so complicated.
Details some really tricky nuances instructors have to navigate while trying to help.
Instructors are often designated as mandatory reporters. This means they have to balance the mental health first aid mandate of keeping conversations private with institutional laws like Title IX and the Clery Act.
Let's break those down for our canine listener. What are Title IX and the Clery Act?
Title IX is a federal civil rights law that prohibits sex-based discrimination, which includes sexual harassment and assault, in any school receiving federal funding. The Clery Act is a federal law requiring colleges to report crime data on and around their campuses, while also providing support for victims of violence.
So if a student reveals a risk of harm or mentions an assault during an ALGE conversation, the instructor is caught in a massive tug of war. They want to maintain the student's trust and privacy, but they have a federal legal mandate to report what they just heard to the university.
Exactly. They have to explain to the student, gently but firmly, that there are limits to their confidentiality. On top of that legal tightrope, first aiders also have to know the difference between a situation where an ALGE chat is appropriate and a situation that is a medical emergency.
Right. If a student is showing physiological indicators of an overdose like excessive vomiting, unresponsiveness, or shallow breathing, that is not the time for a non-judgmental chat.
Definitely not.
You don't use ALGE for an overdose, you dial 911 immediately.
This level of situational awareness is highly demanding. And to manage it effectively and respectfully, human first aiders are taught that the very words they use matter immensely. Language is treated as a strategic asset.
Barking the right way. Humans use words to literally shape their reality. The training puts a massive emphasis on language reform. They want to move institutions away from a deficit model to a recovery model. What's the difference between the two?
The deficit model focuses entirely on what a human lacks. It defines them by their illness, their symptoms, and their limitations. A recovery model flips the script.
It focuses on what they can build.
Right. It views mental health as a personal journey toward hope, autonomy, and a meaningful life, regardless of the diagnosis. To enforce this, instructors use a person-first language table.
Person-first language. That means separating the human from the challenge. You never define a person by the diagnosis. Just like you wouldn't define a dog solely by a limp, you don't define a human by their brain chemistry.
Precisely. For example, instead of calling someone a sufferer or a victim, first aiders are taught to say person living with or person experiencing.
It shifts the focus from passive helplessness to active management.
And it gets rid of derogatory, clinically inaccurate words like crazy or psycho. Instead, they use person with a mental health challenge. I also noticed they explicitly avoid using a condition as an adjective.
That is a very common human habit that needs breaking. Rather than saying she's bipolar or he's an addict, they are trained to say she is living with bipolar disorder or he has a substance use disorder.
Seems like a small semantic tweak, but the implication is huge.
It prevents the condition from becoming the person's entire identity. It frames it as a treatable health condition, just like asthma or diabetes, and this language actively supports what the guides call the 4 dimensions of recovery.
Those 4 dimensions are the foundational pillars that support a human returning to full productivity. First is health, managing the disease itself and making healthy choices to support physical and emotional well-being.
Second is home, having a stable, safe, and consistent place to live.
Third is purpose, engaging in meaningful daily activities, whether that's a job, school, volunteering, or creative arts, and having the independence, income, and resources to participate in society.
And fourth is community.
Community is having relationships and social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. Basically, returning to a healthy pack.
And resilience, by the way, is framed not as some innate magical grit that you are either born with or you aren't. It is framed as a set of behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed by strengthening those 4 dimensions.
Okay, so this is a lot of heavy, nuanced material. How do humans actually learn all of this?
Welcome to Human Obedience School. The certification life cycle to become a mental health first aider seems incredibly rigorous.
It is a serious commitment. Learners first choose a format that fits their schedule, in-person, blended, or blended virtual. But regardless of the format, they all start with a course preparation phase.
What does that involve?
This includes an opinions quiz to measure their pre-existing attitudes about mental health and a pre-evaluation to establish their baseline knowledge.
If they do a blended course, they complete self-paced online modules before attending the live session. Then comes the core of it, the instructor-led training.
Which is really intense.
Yeah, this is where they actually practice the ALG steps through realistic role-play scenarios. Usually there's an instructor 1 leading the content, an instructor 2 co-leading and monitoring the room, and a coordinator managing all the logistics behind the scenes. And to get the certificate, they have to pass a graded final exam.
What I found most intriguing in the training setup is a specific role required for virtual classes that have 20 to 30 learners.
Oh, this was fascinating.
Because the material covers intense topics like suicide and psychosis, they employ something called a virtual hallway monitor.
The virtual hallway monitor. I read that and thought it was such a brilliant human invention. Walk us through a scenario of why this is needed.
Imagine a virtual classroom of 30 instructors learning about suicide risk assessment. For someone in that class who has lost a family member to suicide, that material might suddenly trigger a wave of intense, overwhelming grief. They might start panicking or crying on camera.
It's heavy stuff.
The virtual hallway monitor is a dedicated person, usually a clinician or a highly experienced first aider who is not taking the class, sitting on call, watching the gallery view. If they see a learner in distress, they privately message them and invite them to step out into a separate breakout room known as the virtual hallway.
That way, the distressed learner gets immediate, private, one-on-one emotional assistance from the monitor, while the rest of the class can continue safely.
It's a great way to ensure the learning environment remains a safe space.
But that need for safety doesn't end when the training is over. The materials dedicate a significant amount of focus to protecting the first aider themselves once they are out in the real world.
Absolutely. Because constantly absorbing the distress of others day in and day out leads to something called empathy fatigue. When you spend all your energy sitting in the mud with other people, eventually you get stuck in the mud yourself.
Even the best golden retriever gets tired after a long day of comforting the pack. You have to take a nap eventually. Human instructors have to actively manage their own self-care, or they risk falling into what's called an inner anxiety spiral.
To prevent that downward spiral, First aiders are taught to constantly monitor their own lives across the 8 dimensions of wellness.
What are the 8 dimensions?
These are financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual, environmental, and emotional wellness.
Let's dig into a few of those because they aren't all obvious. What does occupational or environmental wellness actually look like for a college instructor?
Occupational wellness means setting clear, rigid professional boundaries. An instructor has to know when to close their laptop and stop answering frantic student emails at midnight. They have to leave their work at work.
That is so hard for so many people.
It really is. And environmental wellness means creating a physical space that feels safe and restorative, having a quiet home, a clean workspace, or access to nature where their nervous system can actually reset.
And they have to ask themselves really tough, introspective questions across all these dimensions, like, am I prioritizing my physical health, eating right, and sleeping so I actually have the biological energy to help others? Or is my own financial stress reducing my capacity for empathy because I'm too worried about paying my own bills to listen to a student's problems?
They essentially have to self-assess their own biases, maintain strict boundaries, and realize that they cannot pour from an empty cup. If their own 8 dimensions of wellness are collapsing, they cannot effectively administer mental health first aid.
If we pull all of this together, the overarching theme is that human instructors are taking on a very heavy but incredibly beautiful responsibility. They aren't just teaching math or history anymore. By actively observing those 4 pillars, appearance, behaviors, feelings, and thoughts, and utilizing the ALG framework, they are stepping into the gap.
They are completely reforming their language to dismantle decades of stigma. And they are doing the hard, emotional labor of becoming that vital link for students and colleagues who are in the becoming unwell phase.
They are ensuring that no one in the human pack has to suffer in silence or isolation.
And for you, our golden retriever listener, as you rest your chin on your paws right now, it's worth remembering that you instinctively provide the community and the non-judgmental listening that humans are reading thick manuals and taking whole certification courses to learn.
Your natural state of being, your empathy, your quiet presence, your lack of judgment is exactly what these first aiders are striving to emulate in their classrooms and workplaces.
It's true. They're working incredibly hard to build the kind of pack loyalty and support that comes to you without a second thought.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to chew on today. If human institutions have to design these incredibly elaborate systems, if they need bureaucratic acronyms like ALGE and 15-question self-assessment checklists and federal laws and virtual hallways, just to successfully replicate the unconditional presence, non-judgment, and intuitive observation that a golden retriever offers completely for free, what does that say about modern human society?
It's a fascinating question.
Is the ultimate goal of mental health first aid simply teaching humans how to treat each other a little more like dogs treat their human pack?
One that really highlights how much humans still have to learn from their 4-legged companions.
Something to mull over on your next walk. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Good boy.